Jake and Lyra sat in the cold, dark cell, their hands tied behind their backs. The walls around them were made of smooth black metal, humming with strange energy. The air smelled bitter, and the dim red lights flickered above them. Lyra, an alien with deep blue skin and silver eyes, looked at Jake with fear. She was weak, barely able to sit straight. Jake, a human soldier, clenched his fists. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. They were prisoners on an enemy ship, and he had no idea how to escape. The door slid open with a soft hiss. 3 alien guards entered, tall and covered in dark armor. Their eyes glowed red as they stepped forward. Behind them, a 4th alien walked in. Dressed in long robes, his expression calm but cruel. He carried a small metal tray with 2 cups filled with a glowing purple liquid. The robed alien smiled and held up the tray. "This is a gift," he said, his voice deep and smooth. "A drink of honor for our guests." Jake knew better than to trust them. He had seen too many tricks in war. He glanced at Lyra, who was trembling. The alien leader stepped closer, his red eyes watching them carefully. "Drink," he ordered, "or die now." Jake had no choice. If he refused, they would kill him and Lyra on the spot. He took one of the cups, feeling the warmth of the liquid inside. Lyra hesitated before picking up the other cup with shaking hands. The guards watched, their hands resting on their weapons, ready to attack if they refused. Jake took a deep breath and drank. The liquid burned his throat for a second, but quickly faded. It had no taste, no effect. He felt normal. Beside him, Lyra swallowed her drink slowly. For a moment, everything was still. Then she gasped. Her body tensed, and her silver eyes widened in horror. She clutched her throat, coughing violently. Her breathing turned ragged, and her skin began to lose its deep blue color. She fell to her knees, shaking. Panic filled her face as she looked at Jake, her lips moving, but no words coming out. Jake's heart pounded. He turned to the alien leader, rage burning inside him. "What did you do to her?" he shouted. The alien only smiled. "She is weak. She will not last long." Jake clenched his fists. He wanted to fight, to tear these monsters apart, but his hands were still tied. He looked down at Lyra. Her breathing was getting worse. She was dying. He had to do something. Then he realized something strange. The poison had no effect on him. He felt perfectly fine. He looked at his hands, then back at Lyra. If this drink was meant to kill them, why was he still alive? The alien leader seemed to notice Jake's confusion. His smile faded. He stepped forward, staring at Jake carefully. "Impossible," he muttered. "You should be dying too." Jake didn't wait for an explanation. He saw his chance. With all his strength, he swung his body forward, slamming into the alien leader. The robed alien stumbled back in surprise. The guards reacted too slowly. Jake kicked one in the chest, sending him crashing against the wall. He twisted his hands, feeling the ropes loosen slightly. He needed more time. Lyra was still on the floor, barely breathing. He had to get her out of here. The guards recovered quickly, pulling out their weapons. One of them raised a long, sharp blade and stepped toward Jake. But before he could strike, the alarm blared through the ship. Red lights flashed, and a robotic voice echoed through the walls. "Security breach detected. All units report immediately." The sudden distraction gave Jake the time he needed. He yanked at the ropes, and they snapped free. He grabbed a fallen guard's weapon and turned to Lyra. She was still alive, but barely. He lifted her into his arms, feeling how light she was. Her breathing was shallow, her skin cold. The aliens were regrouping, ready to attack again. Jake knew he couldn't fight them all. He had to run. Holding Lyra tightly, he sprinted toward the open door. The guards shouted behind him, but he didn't stop. His only thought was to save Lyra. He had no idea how, but he would find a way. "You said." Jake ran through the narrow metal hallway, carrying Lyra in his arms. The ship's alarm blared, filling the air with sharp, ringing sounds. Red lights flashed along the walls, casting eerie shadows as he moved. He could hear heavy footsteps behind him. Guards were chasing him. He didn't have much time. Lyra's breathing was weak. Her silver eyes fluttered open for a second before closing again. She was barely holding on. Jake gritted his teeth. He couldn't let her die. He had to find help. A cure. Something. But where? He didn't know this ship, and every second he wasted, the poison spread further inside her body. He turned a corner and nearly ran into two alien soldiers. They raised their weapons, but Jake didn't stop. Using all his strength, he slammed into one of them, knocking him to the floor. The second soldier swung at him with a sharp blade, but Jake twisted his body, dodging the attack. With Lyra still in his arms, he kicked the soldier's legs out from under him. The alien crashed to the ground, groaning in pain. Jake didn't wait for them to recover. He kept running. The hallway opened into a larger chamber filled with strange machines and glowing screens. He scanned the room quickly. There, a medical station. A large console displayed different alien symbols, and behind it, a row of glass cabinets held vials of strange liquids. It had to be medicine. Jake placed Lyra carefully on the floor. Her breathing was even weaker now. Panic rose inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He rushed to the console, trying to make sense of the alien language. None of it made sense. He slammed his fist against the screen in frustration. Behind him, Lyra let out a soft gasp. Jake turned quickly. She was shaking, her skin turning an unnatural shade of gray. The poison was spreading too fast. He had to act now. He ran to the glass cabinets and grabbed a handful of vials. Some were green, some blue, some glowing softly. He had no idea which one could help her. His mind raced. He needed to take a risk. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. The guards were coming. Jake clenched his jaw. He didn't have time to think. He grabbed a syringe from the table, filled it with the glowing blue liquid, and knelt beside Lyra. "I don't know if this will work," he whispered, "but I'm not letting you die." He injected the liquid into her arm, hoping, praying. It was the right choice. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then Lyra's body jerked violently. Her breathing became even more uneven, and Jake's heart pounded. Had he made a mistake? The footsteps were getting closer. The guards would be here any second. Jake reached for his weapon, ready to fight if he had to. Then Lyra gasped loudly, her eyes flying open. She sucked in a deep breath, her body shaking. The gray color of her skin slowly faded, returning to her natural deep blue. Her fingers twitched, and she looked up at Jake, confused but alive. Jake let out a breath of relief. She wasn't cured yet, but she had more time. He helped her sit up, supporting her weight. Her body was still weak, but she was breathing steadily now. The door burst open. 3 alien guards stormed in, weapons raised. Jake gripped his own weapon tightly, ready to fight. But now, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Lyra. He was fighting to get them both out alive. "You said." Jake pulled Lyra up, supporting her weak body with one arm while gripping his stolen weapon with the other. The 3 alien guards moved in slowly, their glowing red eyes locked onto him. Their weapons, long and sharp, gleamed under the flashing red lights. Jake knew he couldn't fight them all while holding Lyra, but there was no other choice. One of the guards lunged forward. Jake reacted fast, swinging his weapon upward. The impact sent the alien staggering back, but another guard slashed at him with a blade. Jake barely dodged, feeling the sharp edge cut through the air inches from his face. He tightened his grip on Lyra and stepped back, his mind racing. He needed a way out. Lyra stirred against him, her breath warm but weak. "Jake," she whispered. He glanced down at her. Her silver eyes were half open, filled with pain but also determination. She was alive, and he had to keep her that way. The guards didn't wait. They charged together, their weapons aiming straight for Jake. At the last second, he ducked, twisting his body and swinging his stolen weapon in a wide arc. The force knocked one of the guards off balance, but the other two were too fast. One grabbed Jake's arm, squeezing tightly, while the other raised a blade, ready to strike. Jake growled and slammed his elbow into the alien's chest. The grip loosened just enough for him to break free. He spun, kicking the second guard in the knee. The alien roared in pain and stumbled back. That gave Jake the opening he needed. He turned and ran. Holding Lyra tightly, he sprinted through the open door and down the hallway. His breath came fast, his muscles burned, but he didn't stop. Behind him, the guards shouted, their footsteps pounding against the metal floor. The corridor stretched ahead, filled with more flashing lights and strange symbols on the walls. Jake's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. He couldn't keep running forever. He needed a plan. Then he saw it. The large metal door at the end of the hallway, slightly open. The symbol above it was different from the others. It wasn't in the alien language. It was in English. Escape pods. Hope surged through Jake's chest. He pushed forward, ignoring the burning in his legs. The guards were still behind him, but he was faster. He reached the door and slammed his hand against the control panel. The metal doors slid open, revealing a small escape pod inside. It was built for one person, but he didn't care. He would make it work. He stepped inside, placing Lyra carefully into the seat. Her breathing was still uneven, but she was awake now, her eyes watching him. He knelt beside her, gripping her hand. "Hold on," he said. "We're getting out of here." Before he could close the pod, a heavy footstep echoed behind him. Jake turned just in time to see a massive alien warrior standing in the doorway. Taller than the others, his armor was thicker, and his red eyes burned with fury. In his hands was a large weapon, humming with deadly energy. "You will not leave," the alien growled. Jake stood up slowly, putting himself between Lyra and the warrior. His grip tightened on his weapon. His heart pounded, but he wasn't afraid. He had come too far to fail now. The escape was so close, but first, he had to survive this fight. "You said." The alien warrior stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the escape pod's exit. His armor gleamed under the red warning lights, and his weapon hummed with dangerous energy. His glowing red eyes locked onto Jake with pure hatred. "You should be dead," the warrior growled. "The poison kills all." Jake didn't answer. His mind raced. The alien was right. He should have died like Lyra, but he didn't. His body had resisted the poison. He didn't know why, but right now, it didn't matter. What mattered was getting Lyra out of here alive. The warrior raised his weapon, and Jake moved instantly. He grabbed a metal pipe from the side of the escape pod and threw it with all his strength. The pipe spun through the air, slamming into the alien's arm. It wasn't enough to hurt him, but it was enough to make him hesitate. That hesitation was all Jake needed. He lunged forward, swinging his stolen blade. The warrior blocked it easily, knocking Jake back with a powerful strike. Jake stumbled, barely managing to keep his balance. The alien was strong, too strong. A direct fight wouldn't work. Jake glanced at the escape pod. Lyra was still too weak to move. If he lost this fight, she would die. He had to win. The warrior charged, swinging his weapon in a deadly arc. Jake ducked just in time, feeling the wind from the strike rush past his face. He rolled to the side, grabbing a loose metal panel from the floor and using it as a shield. The alien's weapon smashed against it, sending sparks flying. Jake gritted his teeth. He couldn't keep dodging forever. He needed to end this now. Then he saw it, the emergency release lever on the wall. If he could pull it, the airlock would activate, sucking everything near it into space. It was risky, but it was his only chance. He had to get the alien close enough. Jake pretended to be tired, lowering his weapon slightly. The warrior smirked and stepped forward, raising his weapon for the final blow. At the last second, Jake moved. He dodged to the side and slammed his fist against the emergency lever. Alarms blared. A loud hiss filled the air as the airlock doors cracked open. A powerful force pulled at everything in the room. The warrior's eyes widened as he felt himself being dragged toward the opening. He grabbed onto the metal frame, struggling to hold on. Jake grabbed Lyra and braced himself inside the escape pod. The air howled around them, pulling loose objects into the void. The alien warrior's grip began to slip. His fingers clawed at the metal, but it was no use. With a final scream of rage, he lost his hold and was sucked out into space. Jake slammed the emergency override button, sealing the airlock just in time. The alarms stopped. The room fell silent. Jake exhaled heavily and turned to Lyra. She was still weak, but her eyes were focused on him. She had seen everything. He reached for the escape pod's controls and started the launch sequence. The ship shook as the pod detached. Through the small window, Jake saw the massive alien ship shrinking behind them. They were finally free. But Lyra was still poisoned, and she didn't have much time left. Jake gripped the controls and set a course for the nearest human medical station. He didn't know if they had a cure, but he would find one. Because humans never give up. The escape pod shot through space, leaving the alien warship behind. Jake kept his eyes on the control panel, adjusting their course toward the nearest human station. The pod's small engines hummed, but it wasn't fast enough. Lyra didn't have much time. He turned to her. She lay against the seat, her breathing shallow. The blue color of her skin had faded again, turning a pale gray. Her silver eyes flickered open, struggling to focus on him. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice weak. Jake forced a smile. "Not yet. You have to hold on." Lyra tried to nod but was too weak. She closed her eyes, her body shivering. Jake's heart pounded. The alien medicine had bought her some time, but it wasn't a cure. If he didn't get her help soon, she wouldn't make it. The control panel beeped. A station was nearby, closer than he expected. But as he scanned the screen, his stomach tightened. It wasn't a human station. It was an abandoned outpost floating in the darkness, its metal hull covered in scorch marks. It was risky, but it was their only chance. Jake guided the pod toward the station. The docking systems were offline, so he had to land manually. The pod shook as it made contact with the docking bay. The moment it settled, Jake unbuckled himself and lifted Lyra into his arms. She was lighter than before, her strength almost gone. The air inside the station was thin and stale, but breathable. The emergency lights flickered, casting eerie shadows along the walls. Dust covered the metal floor, untouched for years. Jake moved quickly, scanning the old signs on the walls. Most of the rooms were useless. Storage, control panels, empty quarters. Then he saw it. Medical bay. He rushed inside. The room was dark, but the equipment was still there. He laid Lyra down on an old examination table and searched through the cabinets. Most of the supplies were ruined, but then he found it. An old human medical kit. Jake ripped it open, scanning the labels. Antibiotics, painkillers, emergency injectors. Then, at the bottom, he found something promising. A vial marked universal antitoxin. It was old, but it might still work. He didn't hesitate. He filled a syringe and injected the antitoxin into Lyra's arm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her body tensed. Her breathing hitched. Jake's heart pounded. Had he made a mistake? Then, slowly, her breathing steadied. The gray tint of her skin faded. Her eyes fluttered open, clearer than before. She looked at Jake, confusion turning into realization. "It's working," she whispered. Relief flooded Jake's chest. He ran a hand through his hair, finally allowing himself to breathe. "Told you I'd save you." Lyra smiled weakly. "I never doubted you." The station creaked around them, reminding Jake they weren't safe yet. But it didn't matter. They had survived. And together, they would find their way home.